Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breeze Time with Kathy. Today we're going to start a series on my trip to Greece and Italy. This is the very first trip that I took back to Europe. It happened in 2002. I was traveling with my seminary class and my New Testament professor, Dr. Ben Witherington. My husband Chuck was still alive. And it was a really exciting time for me. I was still in seminary. I was a seminary student, and it was exciting. And I'd like to share that time with you. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you don't mind coming with me a trip down memory lane again. This is a trip I took to Greece. And I had never traveled overseas before. I'd never been to Europe. And everything was a blur. Everything was so new to me. I was so glad my husband Chuck was with me and I had him to hang on to. We traveled from New Orleans to Atlanta, from Atlanta all the way over to France, from to Paris. We almost missed our connection. We went to where did we go there? We went to Greece. Yes, we flew to Athens. From Athens, we missed our plane and we had to go to Thessaloniki in the northern part. What a mess. We eventually got there on a later plane, but our luggage didn't. Our room was this is our first hotel, and our room was, I think it was this one right here, because I remember the flags right outside, and the reason I remember was because they lost our luggage, and all we had in our carry-on. And considering I was such a novice traveler, I didn't know you always put at least one, preferably two changes of clothes in your carry-on bag. So all I had was the clothes I had. So I washed them out, and I put them out on the balcony to dry overnight. They were still damp, because remember, I'd flown on all those changes, that distance. I had to wash them out. And anyway, but I was so excited the next morning when we got off and we headed out for our first round of sightseeing. We were in Thessaloniki, which is the modern name for the city of Thessalonica, ancient city of Thessalonica. And it's a Byzantine city. And it's the city where Paul wrote his famous letter to the Thessalonians. This is the Byzantine church. It dates back to 470 A.D. It's the earliest surviving church in Thessaloniki, ancient Thessalonica. And we went in there. It was quite interesting. As you can see, it's a Romanesque church. And what makes it that ancient Romanesque thing is they have the pillars or the columns that support the sides. They didn't know how to do buttresses yet, so the windows are way up high. And they have the long center of the church. And then they have, see, the windows are high, there's the roof, and that's built in the Romanesque style. And Christians, of course, due to persecution, weren't allowed to start building churches and places of worship for themselves until about the mid-300s. Christianity was legalized by the Edict of Constantine. It was decriminalized in 314, and they began to be able to build their own churches in about that time. It was interesting. They had some wonderful early Christian Byzantine mosaics. I love the way that they glitter and use so much gold. I was very fascinated by these churches. Of course, are Eastern Orthodox churches. Well, this is the Via Ignatia, the ancient Roman road. As you know, all roads lead to Rome in ancient times. That's the saying, and they really did. That's what Rome was the center of the Roman Empire. And this one read from Constantinople, or modern Istanbul, and the Via Egnatia ran all this way. And we were in Thessaloniki, and we were going to go up here to Philippi. That was our first destination on our first day. It was so cool. As we were driving along on the road, I looked down, and this is actually the ancient Roman road. This is the Via Egnatia. These roads were so good that they were used until we didn't learn how to build better roads until really the 20th, well, the 19th, 20th century, the late 19th, earliest 20th century. Roman roads were just that good. And what you see here is only the foundation of the Roman roads. In Roman times, this was the stone foundation. They would have had other layers of sand on top of it, so it would be packed dirt that they would have been traveling on. It was amazing. These roads were really, really good. As a matter of fact, they say Eisenhower got his idea for interstates off because of Roman roads. The Romans built their roads mainly for the ability to move troops great distances over short periods of time in their empire in order to maintain order. And that was one of the main reasons Eisenhower wanted to build interstates. Of course, it helped commerce, and that's exactly what it did for Rome. And it united the empire. And interstates have made trucking and industry, transportation industry, really grow in the United States. Well, we were in Philippi, and this is the Via Egnatia. It was so cool to be able to walk there as it passes through the ancient city of Philippi. We're standing in the marketplace, or the Stoa, and nothing much here, but this was a big, wide open marketplace, and all the shops lined each side, right here and right there. This is the actual jail that was used during the 1st century. The book of Acts tells us that Paul and Silas were imprisoned in this jail. They were arrested while they were in Philippi, and they were in prison here. While they were there, they were placed in chains, and during the night, they sang hymns and they prayed. Now, the earth began to shake, and the doors of the prison flew open, and their chains came off. Now, the jailer, seeing the prison door opened, was horrified, because, you see, Roman law was very strict. If a jailer allowed prisoners to escape, then he had to suffer extreme penalties. Very often, he would be, his property would be seized, his family would be sold into slavery, and he'd be executed. So in order to avoid that disgrace, the jailer is prepared to go ahead and kill himself and commit suicide to save his family and to avoid disgrace. Well, Paul realizes what's going on. He says, no, don't do it. We're still here. We haven't run off. And the jailer says, what must I do to be saved? And Paul seizes the opportunity and said, let me tell you about Jesus Christ. And lo and behold, Paul preaches the gospel message. The jailer is converted, and he and his entire household were baptized. You know, that's one thing that's very interesting that was pointed out to me. Remember, I'm in seminary at this time, and this is some of the evidence that points to the fact that in early Christianity, we have evidence that whole households were baptized. That would include the children and the slaves. and infants even. So probably infant baptism did occur in early Christianity. It was the children of believers were probably baptized in the first century. Right here, we're continuing through the ruins, and it was very interesting. This right here is my husband Chuck, and he's got a video camera right here. And I was taking still pictures. He was taking pictures of with his camera. I was so excited. You see, this is the first time. I haven't been to the Holy Land yet. It's my first trip overseas. It's the first time I've walked in places where the actual events of the Bible happened. Like that jail. I know Paul and Silas were actually in that jail. They walked on the Via Ignatia, that Roman road, and my feet get to walk on it too. Oh, I was so excited. I was so hyped. This is the Colosseum well, the amphitheater right there for the city of Philippi. And this was a shock to me. Public toilets. I didn't know that they did such things, but apparently they were real big on plumbing. They would run water. They'd divert water through sluices right there to run all the sewage out. And they'd come and they'd sit there. Their nice togas would flop around them, and there they would sit there and have their daily constitutionals, I suppose, is a polite way to put it. That's the way my grandmother used to put it. A daily constitutional might refer to a walk, but she used to use it to refer to her daily bowel movements. And they oftentimes would play. They were even in fancy public toilets. They would play music, and so that you wouldn't have to listen to your neighbor, I suppose, make noises associated with that. And very, very interesting. I remember being shocked. Now, this comes from the ruins of a Byzantine church. This was later. Christians weren't, as I said earlier, Christians weren't allowed to build their own churches until about the middle 300s, the mid 300s. In the church here, the ruins of this particular church in Philippi date to about that time. I was really surprised. This is a baptistry, and it's shaped like a cross. And the idea, there again, comes from Paul. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. So when we're baptized, you're crucified with Christ, and the life you live is in Christ. And this is just some ancient Greek writing from that 3rd century, from that cathedral from the mid 300s. Now, then we walked outside the gate, and we walked up the river, and I was really surprised, because that's exactly, again, from the book of Acts. Paul on the Sabbath day walked out, and Paul and Silas walked out along the river where they knew that God-fearers and Jews would gather. You see, Philippi did not have a synagogue. Therefore, it was traditional that on the Sabbath they would gather by the river and outside the city. And I was really surprised, because you see how primitive this looks now? It probably looked very similar at the time of Paul and Silas. It was so interesting. And there he met Lydia, the seller of purple cloth. There were some women who were studying the books of the Torah, and Paul spoke to them, and he preached he preached the gospel message, and Lydia, who was a seller of purple cloth, was converted right on the spot. It was really very interesting. For one thing, she was a woman of independent means. Here's a picture of, this is an icon, which is common in the Eastern churches of how you represent saints. And the gold background is because it is believed that the color of the light in heaven is golden. And this is an image that represents Lydia. And because she sold purple cloth, only people who had ties to the royal household or were given permission by the royal household could wear purple cloth. And only people who had a permission from the emperor could sell purple cloth. So she had, important ties. She was a woman of independent means, which is very, very important. And she must have been a wealthy, prominent, independent woman. These women of independent means were known to be, they weren't as common in Rome as they were in the cities outside of Rome, like Philippi. Now, there's no reason to believe that Lydia knew anything about the gospel of Jesus, except what Paul witnessed to her that day. Yet she was so convinced that she and her entire household were baptized right there in that river. The scripture says that the Lord opened her heart, and he must have. Then she was the head of her own household. She prevailed upon Paul and Silas to accept her hospitality. Now that put her at risk for scandal, but she went ahead and acted as their sponsor, basically, in Philippi. She probably had a very large house, and later on she's addressed as a leader of a house church, and was probably was an early Christian leader in Philippi. Now, Ben talked about my professor talked about that in the first century, there's lots of evidence that women were in leadership positions in the first century church, and that Christianity was very popular among women. And she was a strong, independent woman with high connections already. And even though Christianity was seen as a Jewish sect and there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Rome, the fact that she was there with a bunch of people who were either Jewish or God-fearers, though the name Lydia is not a Jewish name, she was probably a God-fearer. That means people who worship and study and worship in the Jewish God Yahweh, but don't actually convert, because conversion was a long, difficult process. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Rome. In the year 49, which is just about 5 years before Paul is writing this letter, well, maybe around the time Paul's writing this letter, Claudius expelled all the Jews from Rome. In the year 75, which is maybe 30 years later, Vespasian had a romantic relationship with Bernice, the sister of Agrippa. In 75, when he became emperor, he broke off his relationship with Bernice because she was Jewish, and it was going to be a stumbling block for him to become emperor. No, I don't think. Now, Lydia wanted to become a Christian. She was already in a position of importance and social prominence, but she made a full commitment, and she opened her home to these men, and she started the first house church we know of in Philippi. There's a baptistry right there. It belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church. And it's built right there. It is absolutely beautiful, and the acoustics were wonderful. We sang hymns, and it just echoed. It was terrific. We also had our own baptismal renewal service and renewed our baptisms at this site. It was something really special. And I have to admit, I was really touched. It turned out that it was August the 21st, 2002. And the reason I remember that, then we went and got some lunch, by the way. We sat under this great grape arbor, and we had a wonderful meal. And the reason I'll never forget the date is because it was my birthday. It's the first day. I spent this fantastic day in Philippi, and it's my 47th birthday. It was terrific. Absolutely spectacular. Oh, it was wonderful. Well, we landed in Thessaloniki. We driven to Philippi. Now we take a long drive back to see the Meteore. Now, the Meteore is a very interesting thing. And we go through all this land. We pass through many different areas. And the Meteore are tall rocks. They're called Meteore because the ancient Greeks said it looked like the gods had taken large rock spears and just thrown them down from the heavens. But you see, they rise high, and then in the early Christian period, in the early medieval period, they built monasteries on top of them. See these monasteries built on top of them, on top of the Meteore? They are really just breathtakingly gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, it was really, really wonderful up here. The monasteries are quiet. There's about there's several still in existence. And it was really just lovely. They were built this way, of course, to be isolated, to be safe. It was a time of, when you think about what was going on, this happened in the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th centuries. There was a lot of warfare. There was a lot of political upheaval going on. But the monasteries were built isolated. They were easy to defend. They were hard. They allowed the monks to live a prayerful, calm, peaceful life. The nuns too. There were men and women in these monasteries, and they could live a very quiet, self-sufficient life of prayer and devotion. And they believed that they looked to scriptures that say pray without ceasing, and that was the kind of life that they looked to for prayer and contemplation. I stood up there and I used to think, I was raised Roman Catholic. And I used to think, man, I'm telling you, I just don't get why anybody'd want to be a nun or a monk or something like that. But standing up there, looking at this scene and thinking, if I was a woman, the one I was visiting was a nunnery. If I was a woman, and it was the 8th or 9th century, and my choices were that my parents would marry me off to someone, with a political or a financial agenda to connect families. And my best hope was that I would get a husband, and I had a high chance of dying in childbirth, and there was lots of wars and battles, and my home would be overrun, and my husband and children and sons would die in battle, and raids would happen. maybe a life of prayer and contemplation would be very appealing to me. A life where I tried to grow closer to God. I'm sure I'd have a hard time living in a closed community with just a bunch of other women, but maybe there is something there that would be good. I think I could gain some insight about that. Now that's Chuck and I standing up there. I don't think I've changed that much. Well, from there, we headed down toward Athens. We passed through Thermopylae, and of course, Thermopylae was the plain. The landscapes changed a lot since the time of the Greeks, but it was the plain where the 300 Spartans faced the Persian army. See, these are the mountains. There's the 300 Spartans, and there was the 5,000 Persians, led by Xerxes. And Leonidas held them off long enough for the Athenians and all the other ones to gather to be able to defeat them later. And they were only defeated later by the discovery of a goat trail where they came in behind them. And that's a statue dedicated to them. There's still a mound where their bodies were piled up and buried together. From there, we traveled to Delphi. Delphi is the site of the oracle. This is the museum at Delphi. Oh, it's a confusing place, but this is the map, but believe me, it doesn't do it justice, because here's the museum right here, and when you go from here all the way up to the theater, you're going up a big old mountainside, and I got little flatland girl like me from Louisiana got so short of breath walking up that hill. It was unbelievable. This is a Greek sphinx, and I want you to know that my Greek guide informed us that the Greeks invented sphinx long before the Egyptians did, and the Egyptians stole the idea. Greeks did it first, and Greeks did it better. That's one thing I heard from our Greek guide, and my professor told us, don't argue with her, just smile. And this is a charioteer, a Greek bronze, and he would have been leading a chariot. This is very interesting. This stood over it stood in the temple of Delphi. And what it is that in the temple of Delphi, the oracle would make predictions. And the way she made predictions was that there was a crack in the ground, a vent of some sort, where gases came up. And this sat over that, and it has a tube basically that the gases come up through here and through the top right there. And it's called the navel of the earth, because they believed the navel was the center of the body, and this is the center of the earth. Of course, most people think where they are. Most ancient people believed that where they are were the center of the earth, and center of the earth. And this is it's called something like umbilici or something like that. But then the oracle would sit above it on the three-legged stool. She would chew on leaves and inhale the fumes, and she would sort of go into an hallucinogenic state and make her prophecies. This is a picture of her. Doesn't show that particular navel thing, because I suppose this shows an earlier time before that particular stone was put in place. But that's the way she used to do it. Now, she would speak the words, and then the priests would have to translate what she said. So we started out up the mountain, and it is steep. And we climbed. This is one of the treasuries. I'm sure they've been restored since then. This is where the temple of Apollo stood. Apollo. This is where the Oracle of Delphi was, and Apollo is the. It was in the. She was the Oracle of Delphi was in the temple of Apollo. Apollo is the god of prophecy. Very, very impressive. So I have to admit, you see, we're going up a mountain. The mountain I'm on is just as steep as the mountain you see over there. I know I'm complaining about it, but that's the way it is. And quite interesting. Yeah, see, I made it all the way up to the top. Thought I was about to die. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our look at Greece, and we'll finish up with Greece next week and continue on to it and begin Italy. Until next time, God bless you.